Hello team and welcome back to Sunday Vibes. Obviously not in the pub as of yet, just dreaming of drip trays at the moment. I'm joined today by Doogie Critchley and Patrick Van Straten. I was going to say talking of drips, but I thought that'd be a really negative start to the show. Sorry gentlemen. Today we have a question from Free Shved asking about players that we got right that everyone else got wrong. And this is a nice follow-on, right, from players we got wrong that we discussed last week. But before we start, I want to ask both you gentlemen, starting with you, Doogie, perhaps, just because you caught my eye, how has it been making content in lockdown? Are you struggling? Are you prospering, with more time for your own thoughts? What's been the deal?
I wouldn't say I'm either struggling or prospering. I think I'm just sort of getting on with it, really. I think in terms of making content, it's quite difficult with the lack of news. Being a avid sort of news follower of all sport, I'm completely obsessed with BBC Sport, and their content's gone massively downhill. There's just not as much to report on. So in terms of coming up with video ideas, it's a bit more challenging. But I think generally we're doing as good a job as possible. So yeah, excited for the end of it, but yeah, doing okay, I think.
What about you, Patrick? Of course, there's a fair bit of editing, scripting, but you're our chief script writer. Has it been difficult coming up with fresh angles in this period?
It's kind of a team effort, isn't it, coming up with titles? So that's not too bad. I'd say it's more difficult coming up with topics for these shows. Like, obviously we put tweets out, but right now every week I'm quite often doing Sunday Vibes, like finding a topic for that. I'm finding a topic for Extra Time every week. We're doing Continental Club as well, and those are our strands where we kind of want to get into what's actually happening in football right now. And currently, very little's happening, so that's always a little bit tough. But I think actually some of the scripts that our team has put out during the lockdown have been really, really good. Maybe just being able to, maybe they can concentrate a little bit more, or maybe they're just taking more of an interest in kind of older football games because there's nothing happening at the moment. But I think we've done some good stuff, actually.
I concur. I think our output has been pretty much unrivaled across digital football, so massive shout out to the team then before we dive in. Right, back to Free Shved's question. Players which we got right. Critchley, who have been some of your golden shouts that you want to dig back up on the past?
Well, firstly, I've got a lot of things wrong. I know you guys got your opportunity to say that last week, but yeah, I'm by no means like an oracle. I thought, this isn't really players per se, but I thought Sheffield United would finish bottom of the Premier League. I had that pinned to the top of my Twitter timeline for months. I look back at my predictions for the 1920 season, which went out on Football Daily at the start of the year, and I think I was on 3 right out of 10, which wasn't a fantastic return. I think the 3 right, and even one of those was RB Leipzig to finish above Dortmund, and Dortmund are actually 1 point ahead of them, so that could go either way. But I did say Atletico Madrid were going to have a quite severe drop-off, and in terms of their league form, they definitely have. But in terms of players, I was really against Man United selling Romelu Lukaku. I actually have a clip of that I put on my Instagram when it went out at the time, when I just pointed out that he was having a downturn in 18-19 that season, but he'd scored 20 goals in all competitions over the last 4 preceding years, and 17 for West Brom and 16 for Chelsea before that. So he was a regular goal scorer, and I just felt like while lots of players had initially had a bit of a boost when Solskjaer came in, because this was out in February 2019, so around the time of the sort of PSG games, etc. I just thought he was still a proven goal scorer that Man United could have really done with. I wasn't so against selling him if they got, and they got in very good money for him, but it was the lack of replacement that I just thought was such a mistake. And everyone will reply in the comments probably being like, well, Lukaku wanted to leave, they had to sell him. But that's absolute rubbish. He had a contract until 2022. And, part of management is being able to persuade players to stay. It's being able to get players to buy into your dream. And I think they let go of Lukaku just a bit too early, and he's proven them wrong. It's 17 goals and 2 assists in 26 Serie A games, 23 goals in all competitions. Looks completely rejuvenated. far too much to handle for lots of Serie A defences. So that was one transfer that I thought that I called right. One that I was really pleased about when I looked at it was sort of, if you trawl through our podcast research, some of that I think is some of our best research, I'd say. And I was quite a big fan of Stefano Sensi when he was at Sassuolo. I remember him putting him forward for a couple of podcasts, actually. And whilst he's missed 16 games with injury this year for Inter whilst on loan, although they're going to make that move permanent in the summer, particularly at the start of the year when he had a run of games behind him, he looked really, really promising. I think it was 2 goals and 3 assists in 16 Serie A games, although most of those goal contributions came in the first half of the year before those injuries struck. And he's putting in a defensive shift as well. I think it's over 3 tackles and interceptions, 3.6 shots, 1.7 key passes. Just looks like a fantastic player and a really such a fun player to watch as well. So he'd potentially be one of my more successful shouts. What else was there? How to Fix Chelsea. In a podcast in February 2019, I suggested they signed Achraf Hakimi and Timo Werner, who they're now quite heavily linked with as well. Although from what we're hearing, he's still preferring Liverpool as his preferred destination. And then even further back in July 2018, I wrote a script on players who could take the season by storm. I included Jadon Sancho after 12 appearances for Dortmund, albeit he had got 1 goal and 4 assists in 17-18, so he looked pretty promising. And I also included Ryan Sessegnon, who then earned a move to Spurs on the back of a good campaign.
So which of these suggestions are you most proud of?
I would go with...
Because when we start to get towards Jadon Sancho, I'm going to have to cut you off, mate, because...
Well, I don't think anyone would have predicted quite the impact he's had after 12 games. I think you can also, if you go back far enough, you can say that you've spotted a European elite talent in quite early stages. Also said Chiesa was one to watch at the start of last season. He now looks like he's going to get a big move. And David Neres as well, who's still at Ajax, but helped them to the semi-finals. So there's a couple of shouts in there that I was pretty pleased with. But I have to temper that with, when we write these top 10 scripts, you're often really keen on about 3 of the suggestions. Quite pleased with about 3 of them. And then by the time you get to the 8th, 9th and 10th suggestion, it's quite difficult to keep, being absolutely sure on all of these. So there was a lot of... There's always a couple of shouts that don't sometimes turn out in these scripts as well. But I was quite pleased with those.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the world of football, 3 out of 10 is a fairly good job if you can live with that. I think most scouts at top clubs would take that return, wouldn't they? So a very well-rounded trip around the continent there to be fully expected from Doogie Critchley. Patrick, which of Doogie's shouts do you like? Do any of them mirror your suggestions? And please introduce us to yours, because as another avid scriptwriter, I imagine your list of hit and misses are sort of there in equal measure, right?
I'd say there are more misses than hits. I agree with Doogie. When you're naming 5 to 10 players a week, you inevitably have more misses than hits, because a player could turn out to be a pretty good player, but if you've said they're a future superstar, you're kind of wrong. I think that Sancho one is really good, because now I think people say it was obvious, and people say he was highly rated at the time, but loads of players have been highly rated. Loads of young players are highly rated. People go on and on. People have been going on about Phil Foden for 3 years. People went on about Harry Winks for years. And they've turned into useful Premier League players, but neither one is a star like Foden is. And so I think, on that kind of note, I wrote something about Alexander Isak. I put him on a future superstars list when he was still playing in Sweden for AIK. He was 17 at the time. And I think he just got into double figures for senior appearances. And so I was pretty pleased with that, because he's having a tremendous season now at Real Sociedad. I remember putting Gnabry and Havertz on a list of the Bundesliga's best youngsters back in 2017. Gnabry at that point had just left Arsenal to go to Werder Bremen. Kai Havertz was 17 and had 1,000 minutes of senior football. But I said he looked like he might be an elite talent. So I feel pretty good about that. Some of the others, the thing is, when I joined FD didn't do any stats content. I'd been following stats for a couple of years, but I remember in the early days of FD, having to sit down and go over what key passes were and why shots were more important than goals and stuff like that. That was Like that was probably my biggest contribution to the channel, like making more stats-based content, I suppose. But at the time, we still had quite a limited understanding of stats. Like back then, we could use who scored, but we couldn't get like XG data except what a couple of people tweeted out. It was really, really hard to get solid information. So there were players back then who we kind of amped up quite a bit. You know, off the top of my head, I guess like Anthony Modeste like scored a bunch of goals one season, and so as a result, like that was kind of the information we had, that he'd scored a load of goals, and we didn't have much else to go on. There was no way to check that. Whereas now you can see someone scored 20 goals, you can go and look at their shots, you can look at their XG, and you can kind of make sure that every box is being ticked. But I don't know, there were players I didn't like. I mean, Jean-Michel Seri, when he was linked with Barcelona and Arsenal, I said that I didn't want Arsenal to sign him. I didn't think he was good enough. He ended up going to Fulham that summer. He got 2 assists in 32 appearances. He's at Galatasaray now. So I feel vindicated there, though I didn't think he'd be that bad. And to be honest, I don't think he was that bad. I think sometimes something happens that makes your shout look better than it actually was. So with Griezmann, for instance, last summer, I said that I didn't think Barcelona should sign him because they were overpaying for an old player. I didn't think he'd be that bad this season. He's been pretty bad this season. My point wasn't that I thought he'd be bad this season or even next season. My point was just that it was a lot of money to spend on someone who wasn't going to be very good for very long. In the end, it makes you look kind of prophetic when he ends up having a bad campaign. And maybe that's a little bit misleading. A couple of others, James Maddison, when he was still in the Championship, like I think about halfway through his breakout season with Norwich, I put him high up on a list of players too good for the Championship. He ended up finishing that season, I think, with like 14 assists or something insane. And obviously went off to Leicester and has been sensational since then. But I guess probably my best shout was Mo Salah. Like I think we all liked him when he was in Italy. But I do remember when he started being linked with a move back to the Premier League, how many newspaper headlines were like, Chelsea flop, Chelsea reject, like coming back to the Premier League. This is such a huge gamble, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote a script. Actually, I put him in a couple of scripts when he was in Italy. But I remember putting him on a list of signings who could become club legends in July 2018.
Rolls off the tongue.
I wrote that like the week that he signed for Liverpool. When it would look like he was going to sign for Liverpool. It was a month before his first game. And I said his pace and his ability to come inside from the right and combine with Liverpool's other forwards should help Liverpool compete domestically and in Europe. I also got some I remember, for saying his goal and assist record over the 2 previous seasons was actually better than either Coutinho's or Mane's. I remember I was on a show as well with Smithy, our friend Smithy, and Danny Mills, where we were talking about some of the best and worst signings of the season. And Danny Mills said the best signing of the season was going to be Jermaine Defoe on a free for Bournemouth. And I said the best signing of the season, the bargain of the season, was going to be Mo Salah for 35 mil. And you know what? I feel like I came out on top in that particular one.
Victory over Danny.
And I mean, it's difficult.
I love how you've never dropped that. It's one of my favourite sort of PVS encounters, you versus Danny Mills.
No, it's just one of those things where, like, the thing is about Mo Salah, I think when you look back at stuff now, it's like Jadon Sancho. You look at him and you think, okay, well, people knew he was a good player and now he's proved to be excellent. But I think it's easy to forget how sceptical people often are at the time. Like with Mo Salah, people were like, well, it's only Italy and he wasn't very good at Chelsea. They wouldn't have sold him if he wasn't good. I mean, Jose Mourinho sold him. Similarly, when De Bruyne signed for Man City, I remember there were loads and loads of headlines that were just like, Chelsea flop, £55 million for a Chelsea flop. And it's just weird how people overreact to players who've come to the UK and maybe had a bad season or maybe just played for a crap club and really struggled. Like Thauvin being written off after his time at Newcastle. I'm sure the same's going to happen to Joel Linton. I just think that people are... The press particularly always want to call people flops and rejects if they haven't done it in the Premier League. And from that point of view, it's actually quite easy to look good with players like this, because you just find someone who's been outstanding in another European league and say this guy's pretty good. And generally speaking, if they've played in a top 5 league and they've been pretty good, they're normally pretty good.
Before I come in with my suggestions, I want to ask the pair of you, when you look for a hill that you're willing to die on, statistically speaking, a player you're really willing to back to the hilt, what numbers do you look for? What style of player do you gravitate towards, Duga?
Well, in terms of players that I, willing to die on a hill for, or whatever the phrase you use, I am actually quite like a level person. I've got a reputation in the FD community for being like making awful shouts, but I actually think my shouts are almost too passive. Like, I rarely say this guy is going to be a disaster. I rarely say like I put my house on this guy succeeding. Probably as a fault. I should probably be more decisive. But I think the key thing with stats is to understand the context of a way a team plays. So I don't just look at how the player plays. I try and understand how his team plays. For example, like a really defensive side that sits very deep. You'd probably expect him to have very high, for a centre-back, you might expect him to have very high aerial duel win rate, or very good tackles and interceptions. But from more of a pressing side, you'd expect, more distance covered. You'd maybe expect them to be very good in the transition, key passes on the break, that sort of thing. So it's a combination of factors, really. I do think since expected goals statistics came in, I think that really does add more than your baseline dribbles, key passes and shots. But I think we've also come to realise as a channel that our coverage of statistics only goes so far, and we do the best we can with the stats available. But the best thing to do is to combine them with a good first-hand knowledge of having seen them play. So I try and watch as many highlights as I can, but there's some players you just can't watch enough of. So you're effectively going off the limited amount you have seen them. And baseline statistics, and I think expected goals is where that really makes the player stand apart. If they're exceeding in expected goals, expected assists, build up, XG chain, etc., then that they should be a safer bet, I think.
Nice. Pat, what about you?
It depends on position. I mean, I will never ever put my house on a centre back. I just won't. A centre back stats, like Doogie's kind of said, stats are so dependent for those positions particularly on system. And goalkeepers as well are pretty hard to analyse, though we're getting better information on them now. So, with strikers, you want to see shots, you'd like to see a bit of creativity, you'd like to see dribbles. I think that, really what I want to see is either somebody who's outstanding in like one particular regard, or they're very good in a bunch of regards for me to be particularly kind of sold on them. Like, if you're a striker and you're just getting tons of shots in the box, I don't really care if you've got key passes or dribbles or aerial wins or any of that rubbish. I don't care. Like, it's not that important, because if you're getting tons of shots in the box, you are going to score goals. It's just as simple as that. Your XG will be high. You'll score a bunch of goals. But different positions, it also depends who's looking at buying them, Like with Seri, my issue wasn't really that I didn't think he was a decent passer or a decent creator. But I remember looking at his numbers at the time and I was like, he's not really a dribbler. He does no defending. He actually looks very similar to Artur now at Barcelona. But he was quite a lot older. He was pretty expensive. There was nothing there that really made me think this guy is Barcelona quality. So also the other thing I guess I look for is no gaping hole in their numbers. If I look at everything and I think, okay, right, well they've got good creative numbers and they're a good dribbler, but they've got absolutely no defensive output, and say they're a midfielder, then I will just think no. And similarly, if you've got a fullback who's like getting a ton of assists, I don't really care if they can't defend at all. To me, you've got to think about what their primary job is, and then think about other things that are bonuses. And you've kind of got to make a decision based on that. But sometimes you just fall in love with a player for whatever reason, or sometimes you think you can kind of see a way past it. So like Marcus Thuram, I was super sold on really, really early at Guingamp. And a lot of his numbers made that kind of easy. But actually, by the end of the year, his numbers looked kind of middling. Like, his XG wasn't spectacular. His dribble numbers were very good, but his shots weren't great. His key passes weren't great. But it's because Guingamp were absolutely terrible. And because I've been following him through the season and watching him a fair bit, by the end of the year, I knew I was still sold on him. And he was so young that I just thought, this is a guy who, if he gets the right coaching and he gets the right move, is going to be fantastic. And fortunately, both those things happened.
Yeah, I'm very similar to you boys in that you like to see, a combination of those stats, and then you like to sort of filter it by position or by a team's needs. So I think that approach, very well rounded, and hopefully helps people out there. And also, something I often raise with people that DM me is that we don't have access to possession adjusted stats. And this is where players maybe like Sergio Busquets or Rabiot at PSG, not necessarily at Juventus now, their numbers can go maybe a little bit underappreciated. Their contribution to top sides can go under the radar because their defensive contributions don't look massive given the amount of possession their sides have. So that's another good indicator that volume doesn't always equal quality, right? So people will often send me players who are averaging 4-5 plus shots, but their shot location might not be great, or players who are averaging 6-7 tackles interceptions per game, but you put them in a more ball dominant side and maybe they can't adapt to that possession heavy style of play. So context is key. I won't go over this too much more because I think you boys, like I said, provided very, very well-rounded answers. Let's finish off this section then with a couple of suggestions from me, and we'll go on to quick-fire questions. So similar to you, Pat, with your boy Marcus Thuram, when I saw Martin Odegaard, and I pulled these numbers from a podcast we did way back when, this was before his loan stint to Real Sociedad. I think it was just actually halfway through his spell at Vitesse, Leonid Slutsky's Vitesse Arnhem, and he was just on fire from the get-go, which wasn't the case at Herenveen. He didn't set the Eredivisie unlike when he first joined from Real Madrid, and actually there was a lot of bad press that followed him round after his sort of initial 1-2 years at Real Madrid because he was on astronomical wages and apparently refused to train with Castilla on a few occasions. Not sure if that was ever clarified. And there was a bit of ill will following him round. But actually, if you look at his numbers from his time at Vitesse, not only was he producing over 3 key passes, which was third in the league behind the likes of Ziyech, he was also defensively very sound as well. And you saw in his numbers that he curtailed his more attacking impulses to benefit the team, and that's what I liked him seeing in him on that particular occasion. The fact that he had that mentality, that he had that adaptability, and it's been great that him, Mika Marino, Alexander Isaac have all kind of prospered in this Real Sociedad side. Obviously, when Joan Jordan was at Eibar, really liked his key passes, his deep progressions, his amount of deep progressions with his pass accuracy as well, which kind of suggested that he picked those passes at a very opportune time, right? He's moved to Sevilla. I've not really checked his numbers at Sevilla to see if he's done really well there, but I think that was an acquisition we sounded out pretty early. On our Champions League B-side podcast, we also spoke about Haaland quite early. This was before his kind of rip-roaring Champions League campaign with Salzburg. It might have been one game in, actually, but I remember reading, I think there's a Twitter account called The Other Bundesliga, and just reading a profile on him there and having watched him score 9 goals in an under-20 game against Honduras, just thought, okay, there's probably a chance this guy's going to be a beast. Ismail Assar, I think Ismail Assar as well, who kind of Joe professed to being one of the worst footballers he'd seen in his first sort of 3-4 games at Watford. I was pretty bullish on him coming good after his move from Rennes. He produced really solid numbers at Rennes, and it's kind of great to see that he's proved to be a really adept dribbler, ball progressor, and just a real strong creative outlet for Watford under Nigel Pearson. I think we're running the risk of sounding overly smug here, so let's move on from that section. But some outstanding answers from you boys. Okay, let's start quickfire then. So, Dana J has asked, is this the right opportunity for big clubs to get their targets at a cut down price from medium clubs? What do you reckon, Doogie?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. There's already been quite a few agents saying that it should reset the market to pre-Neymar levels. We're seeing Bild report quite heavily that Bayern Munich are confident of landing Leroy Sané for about 60 million, which 2 years ago would be absolutely unheard of. He looked like a 100 million plus player. What it will also do is it means that players, the selling club can't really afford to not accept these 50-60 million pound deals when before they could deal with 100, because it might take, if there's a global recession, which many are predicting, it might take years for the transfer market to go back to normal. Although on that, I would say that the last time there was a global recession in 2008, it didn't really slow down the market that considerably. Ronaldo moved the following summer to Real Madrid for a world record fee. So no one is entirely sure what's going to happen because there's so much uncertainty, not just around football, but football's finances. But yeah, I would predict a massive drop in the overall sort of the bog standard signings from your 60 million pluses down to 30-40 million plus. It will be sort of back to 2012 levels, I would have thought.
Do you share those thoughts, Pat? Do you think the time is right to strike?
I think it depends what happens early in the window. I think if a couple of players go cheaply earlier in the window, then that will set the tone for the rest of it. But yeah, I think smaller clubs are always reliant for their money on bigger clubs. Bigger clubs have more robust, more anti-fragile revenue streams than smaller clubs, and smaller clubs depend for their existence on that money trickling down to them in the form of transfer fees. So I think that if you're interested in a championship player this summer, it's probably a good time to go for it. I'm not sure if it's really going to affect like Man City selling Sané. I think he's more likely to be at a knockdown price because he's got a year left on his contract. But I think that, yeah, if you're looking for a player from, say, the upper mid-table of one of Europe's top 5 leagues, you'll probably get them with a kind of 25 to 40% haircut, which is like not that bad, really. It might turn 30 million players into 20 million players. I think that's actually, if you have a wealthy owner whose money is reasonably safe at the moment, we were talking about this actually, Doogie and I, on the podcast. It's probably worth putting your hand in your pocket and investing a little bit more this summer. If you're a club like Arsenal where you have a very wealthy owner, you should probably go out and actually spend quite heavily this summer, because the value you'll get in the market this year will be vastly better than next year or the year after. Yeah,
and the Premier League is going to be a different kettle of fish to Serie A, for example. I mean, I think the Premier League's TV revenue is twice that of Serie A's at the moment. So there's going to be certain leagues that are more robust than others. Of course, teams in the Bundesliga historically more profitable than their European counterparts. Juventus are sort of in a financial league of their own in Italy, aren't they? But apart from that, and perhaps Real Madrid and Barcelona, despite Barcelona having to take a loan out to buy Griezmann, I think, yeah, there might be a lot of moves at that level, like you said. Right, next question. Tomo, who deserves to be in the Premier League Team of the Year but won't make it? Doogie.
Oh, I actually did my Premier League Team of the Season and put it on Twitter a couple of days ago, so this is fresh in my mind. I think a lot of people would put a pretty much entire Liverpool back four with one space at centre-back. And I put Johnny Evans down as my second centre-back. I think a lot of people early on in the season would have put Soyuncu, but I actually think Johnny Evans has been the better of the two. And in a year where the centre-back, I don't think the centre-back talent is particularly strong in the Premier League, or really any league at the moment. There's a massive gap, seemingly, between the world-class talents of Ramos and Piqué and the world-class talents coming through between the ages of 19 and 25. Except for Virgil van Dijk and the likes of Koulibaly, there's not that many elite centre-backs. So yeah, Johnny Evans would be my suggestion. Also think Wilfred Ndidi has to have a spot in midfield as well. But otherwise, it's probably much as you'd expect. The KDB is pretty much an entire Liverpool 11 and probably Jamie Vardy up front.
Okay, where do you differ, Pat, if at all?
No, I kind of agree with those. I mean, like, I think people like Aubameyang and Aguero won't really get in there. I think actually, weirdly, City will probably get basically nobody in apart from De Bruyne, because there seems to be this idea that like City need to be perfect, and if they're anything less, they've been terrible. It's quite strange. But obviously as well, like right backs who are having good seasons, like Pereira and Aaron Wan-Bissaka have got no shot because it's going to be Trent. So that's a little bit disappointing for them because both of them have been excellent this season.
Yeah, nice. I think Danny Ings as well probably deserves an honourable mention, but won't make the team, of course. Okay, last one then before we go into our personal questions. This one is from Joe Martin. What country outside of Europe and South America, he's put in South America, do you see winning the World Cup first? So we can keep this nice and short, gents. Who are you thinking? Who springs to mind?
I mean, you immediately think of like maybe Nigeria, maybe. But on the other hand, Nigeria have been competing at a pretty high level for a while, and have not ever really challenged that deep. So then the temptation is to think that maybe an emerging superpower in football, like China or the USA. But I'll go with my heart and say Nigeria.
Yeah, I was thinking Nigeria or Senegal, but then I'm also quite with Pat's shout of the US. There's a lot of talent coming through there. There's obviously Pulisic. Serginho Dest is getting a lot of talk as well, and Canada also have a lot of talent coming through. You know, Alphonso Davies, Jonathan David. I think there's a long way to go in Canada, but yeah, potentially the US. But it's quite alarming that there's no sort of outstanding candidate ready to trouble the elite of South America and Europe as it stands. I wouldn't say.
Well, one stage it looked like it was going to be Mexico, right? Like Mexico would have been the obvious candidate a little while ago. And Mexico are still capable of just like having a golden generation and being great. Like I could see that happening.
Yeah, Mexico just can't make it past the round of 16 at the moment, can they? And historically, Canada have just been huge underachievers despite the resources that they kind of pour into the game. So that is an odd one. Nigeria and sort of Ghana on my go-to sides. Nigeria look like they have a brighter future given the talent that is coming through. Some of the names we've already mentioned earlier in this episode. But yeah, I'm also going to go with Nigeria. I don't think I have a better shout than that. Right, a couple of personal questions then to round the show off, because there's a drill outside my house and my signal is terrible and I'm very, very close to losing my head, gentlemen, to be perfectly honest. Charlie Carey, favourite spread for toast? Brackets or crumpets? So first of all, Doogie, are you a crumpet man or a toast man if given the option? You know, for me, crumpets are a treat. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I don't go for crumpets very often. I'd probably be closer to a muffin man, if anything, really. But I do like, what do I like? I like chocolate spread. I love a good jam, honey. Haven't really got on board with marmalade yet. I feel like I have to be about 20 years older to get on board with that. But yeah, I'd go with Nutella probably as my treat on my muffin.
Muffin. Pat, what about you?
Just good butter, man. Good butter, salt and pepper, and occasionally Marmite if I want some umami. I've only recently got into Marmite, like the last couple of years, and it's incredible.
I remember you telling me you put salt and pepper on your toast, and I wasn't sure about you in that moment in time. I just thought,
can you just eat like butter on toast though? That's so bland.
I just thought that was a completely alien concept to me.
It's actually quite common in places outside the UK, but here people would rather eat like bland, like cardboard. I don't understand it. It's just
is it that
as soon as you do it, you're like completely. You'll never go back.
Is it that fine salt? The sort of is it like the rock
salt?
Oh, that is. I mean, that on anything.
It's great.
I mean, we have Maldon salt, so I tend to use that, but I'll use what we've got. Like, I mean, I'll use rock salt if we've got that, but I'll also use like shitty table salt if it comes to it. Or you could just get a really good salted butter, but it's almost never salty enough.
Here's something that I used to do pretty regularly growing up that I've kind of figured out that is not commonplace. I used to have ham on toast. No one?
Oh, I could get down with that, yeah.
Of course you could, you savage. We'll end it there then with ham on toast. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. It's been a little bit of a struggle on my part, but we've persevered. Hope that's a decent episode and you all enjoyed it at home. Doogie, what is live on Eurofootball Daily that the fine people at home should go and watch next?
You should go and check out Friday's Continental Club. You should go and check out Stat Wars from Wednesday, which was Chris versus Seagull. And on Thursday, we did a scout report on how to get Wolves into the Champions League. So go check out that content. Should be good.
Pato, what is the podcast on this week, my friend?
Doogie and I were talking about how you can rebuild your club this summer on a shoestring given the market situation. So actually quite germane to some of the stuff we talked about today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, and, watch out for Monday's XI. Bye.
Bye.